Hello and welcome back to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have Sam Forget.
Where's that? You got it.
I'm like reading it at it's spelt forget, but it's Forget. I remember because I was just on his podcast recently, and I've had like over 12 people actually message me now about the podcast I was on with you. I'm like, wow, okay, what did I even talk about? I don't remember, but Sam's that person that everything I post and he posts, we kind of resonate with and we want to talk about. So you're going to get a lot of gems from this conversation because we're going to talk about some stuff that isn't really talked about because it's not popular, but it's something we need to take into account when making any changes and actually wanting them. Because on two sides of the spectrum, there's the whole you don't want it bad enough, but that's not true if you're pushing so hard, but it's going in the wrong direction. And then there's the sunk cost effect, which Sam's going to be talking about as well. But then what happens if we don't let go of the things we came to as, who says it? Someone says it. It's just like you can't fix problems with the same mindset that created them. So if you're going to keep coming to a coach, coming to a program, coming to a journey with the same mindset, the same approach, the same quick fix mentality, what do you expect the coach to do? Just like be some magical genie there that just makes all the wrong shit you're doing turn into some bloody magical dust? Because it still stinks no matter how much glitter you put on the shit, it's still gonna stink. So with that, here's Sam. I'm gonna let him talk about pretty much everything that I just said can be taken in so many directions. So I'll let you take that away.
Of course. Well, first of all, I appreciate you having me. And I think the sunk cost effect is a wonderful place to start, which, just for more context, is the completely understandable and normal human tendency to not want to let go of a pursuit or a goal or a process that we've invested a lot of time, energy, money, and resources into. And actually, a really good example of this is Facebook and just social media in general. With most medias, we know that we don't have a lot of privacy on them. We know that our information is often sold for advertising, but since we've spent so much time on these apps, it's unlikely that we want to part ways with it and test the waters with a new app. So that's an immediate example that comes to mind that a lot of people can relate to. But the reason this has been very top of mind recently is because I would say a couple of weeks ago, I had this stretch where it felt like every single night before bed, I felt like a failure and I couldn't really put a finger on it. It just felt like I was missing the mark on something and I didn't really know what. So I finally took my own advice and did a written brain dump where I just journaled every single thing that was on my mind. And what was very top of mind then was all the things that I was supposedly working on. And I'll spare you the full list here, Ruby, but I think there were 35 or 40 things that, according to me, then were priorities. But some of the bigger picture ones were becoming bilingual. So learning Portuguese, getting outside every day, spending less time on social media, growing my business, growing the podcast, the list goes on. So it makes sense that if I was spread that thin, I wasn't really moving the needle in any meaningful way for any of these goals. But because of that sunk cost effect of, well, I feel like I've spent a little time pursuing this and a little bit of money pursuing that and some resources pursuing this other goal, it became very tough for me to part ways with any of those goals. But I had to realize and kind of do that self audit. The more time I didn't, there's actually a bigger cost of not parting ways with a goal or a process or something that isn't really going well, something that's not really making you feel good, that dramatically outweighs that initial sunk cost. So I took that initial list of, say, I don't know, 35 goals or whatever it was, and narrowed it down to, I believe, 3 or 4 things that I wrote down that were my priorities every single day that I focused on. And again, it was difficult to let go of that other stuff because I didn't want to feel like I wasted my time pursuing them. But the alternative, which is barely moving the needle on anything and wasting even more time, was obviously far worse.
This kind of sums into that post that we were talking about, where if you're hiring a coach, getting them to just yell at you to do these certain things, it's going to be pretty pointless if you're not even leaving room for anything that you actually want to start doing. Because sometimes we need to let things go in order to make room for things that we want to do. And this is perfect timing because I've had this conversation about 6 times this week with people who are feeling so overwhelmed. What could I do better? What am I not doing? Where could I improve? Blah, blah, blah. But it's just like, how many expectations are you are you setting on yourself, and are they realistic? Why do you have these expectations? But I don't know whether you see this as well, but people try to plan like years into the future, and it's just like, what is this fear that you're trying to avoid? What is this feeling you're trying to avoid in trying to do all these things? Because how can you realistically figure out what it is you truly want and get rid of the fluff so that you can do those things you need to do to make you healthier, to make you fitter, to get you feeling more confident? But if you're always feeling like you're so confused and scattered, you're not giving yourself any chance of that.
I like how you describe that, stripping the fluff, because it frees up the bandwidth for you to then explore, pursue alternative routes that likely are going to get you to your goal, even if the goal isn't what you initially thought it might be. So you take the example of somebody coming to a coach who has tried, whether it's keto 14 times, or they've tried intermittent fasting a million times, or, these circuit style training and these super fast pace, yada, 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 the list goes on. And they've gotten sporadic results, or maybe just not the results that they've wanted, but because they've spent so much time doing things the same way over and over and over, you have that, well, I don't want to feel like I was doing the wrong thing the entire time. You have an emotional attachment where people feel like, oh, well, I got results when I was doing X, Y, and Z. But I'm sitting here saying, hey, if we're having this conversation right now, can we really call those, I want to say results because you got them at one point, but they're what I call borrowed results, where a lot of the approaches that people use get them results that you can keep for a little while, but eventually you don't get to keep them. So if you're interested in getting results that you can actually keep, the sustainable results that people actually talk about, you have to be willing to let go of the approaches that no longer serve you, even if they move the needle a little bit, even if at one point they did serve you, because if you don't strip that fluff, as you mentioned, Ruby, and you don't give yourself the time, the bandwidth, or the runway to pursue an alternative direction. And I recognize that's difficult, but like we mentioned before, at that first sunk cost example, the alternative is staying exactly where you are. So there's virtually no downside to opening up and trying something a different way.
The cost of inaction, and this is something that I've been talking about a lot as well in my own stories, like, you need, as uncomfortable as it is, you need to get really freaking clear on the cost of not acting. And it's not like, people think that cost is just related to money, but think about the mental stress, the emotional stress. How about the fact that you don't actually enjoy food when you're eating out with your family because you're always feeling guilty? You hate how you feel in your skin. But this has very little to do with the fact that you're a failure. It's just the fact that you've been chasing the wrong things. And like I put up in my post recently, it's not that there are bullshit coaches out there, and it's not that there are bullshit programs out there. What is the mindset that you're approaching those things with? Because there's a reason that you're attracted to the quick fixes. Like, you need to, there's this saying, I probably a lot of people won't even know this if you don't know a single thing about the Bible, but there's this saying that goes something like, you need to remove the log out of your eye before you take the speck out of someone else's. So it's like, you need to see where you are going wrong first before you blame all these other quick fixes, which is what a lot of trainers and coaches are doing out there. But how's that helping you? And at the same time, it's like, instead of you always blaming yourself, which is something Sam actually mentioned before, we're like, we're hard on ourselves as it is. Maybe if you come to it with a place of self-compassion and forgiving the past, like, how important is it for us to actually forgive ourselves for the past to be able to move forward?
Well, if you look at it in terms of where your time is best spent, where your mental energy is best spent, if you perceive yourself as a failure or think you did something wrong, whether it's something big picture or whether it was just you missed a workout or you overate on a weekend, and on Monday you were just absolutely bashing yourself. I'm a piece of shit. I'm so lazy. Why can't I get my shit together? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? I'm not saying that feelings of frustration aren't valid. It's normal, especially if you are a high performer, to feel like, damn, I wish I did a little bit better. But we could sit here and trash all you want, but that doesn't actually move the needle in anything that you're looking to do. So this is where I look at almost rerouting that energy a little bit to something that actually serves you. And in the case of missing a workout, in the case of overeating, wherever you feel like you fell supposedly off track with your plan, this is where I like to get very, very specific with clients about what they feel off track actually is, and what this track is that theoretically is going to lead them to their goals. Because I find that when a lot of people do that bashing of themselves and they're super hard on themselves and all this self-sabotage type stuff, it's very surface level, very vague. For example, hey, Ruby, how did the weekend go? Oh, not great. I was just, I was so lazy the whole time and I didn't get anything done. Well, what does that actually mean? And if we get more specific, maybe we realize that you were supposed to get 2 workouts in and you only got 1 in. And the reason you missed the second one was because of this time constraint. Great. Now that we got specific, we can actually get productive with your frustration. So instead of sitting here and throwing up our hands and, oh, woe was me, I blew it, we're going to reroute that. So we're going to say, all right, entering this week, what obstacles, what time specific obstacles might you anticipate that could prevent you from getting a workout in? Well, I have X, Y, and Z on Friday or Saturday. Cool. Here's how we're going to modify your workout so it's more realistic to get in during a time crunch. So we take what could be incredibly vague and unhelpful, we get specific, and then we turn around and set it in the other direction for, whether it's planning, whether it's just being proactive with your thoughts. Because, and this is a bit of a side tangent, but I think it's relevant here. There's an expression I'll use often with my clients that your obstacles are not nearly as problematic as your lack of preparation for those obstacles. So for example, a weekend, you have a meal out and you didn't stick to your plan, you're bummed about it. It's very, very rare that something truly comes up ultra last minute. And even if it does, there's a system that you can develop for the next time that it happens. Usually the most problems surface is when you have the opportunity to be proactive and you don't do anything about it. So obviously that's a transition to a slightly different topic, but those would be my
perfect.
Yeah,
That is actually the perfect thing, because I don't know whether you saw my little chat on perfectionism and what you expect, but it's like, what do you expect? Do you expect it to be so bloody smooth sailing that it just slips down the surface? People aren't willing to acknowledge the fact that you're going to fail. You're not going to acknowledge the fact that there are going to be obstacles, that hiring a coach or starting a new journey or having 120% motivation isn't going to last very long. And if you aren't willing to sit with potential obstacles that may come up and how you can navigate them, how do you expect to go through that without the retreat of fear? Because if you don't play through those obstacles in your mind, you're going to have a fear response when you come up against them. And you're either going to self-sabotage or you're going to throw your hands up in the air and actually quit altogether because I'm not good enough. There is no way I can do this. It's too hard for me. I'm not made out for this. But the question to what you just said is, where you said what is off track, how do you navigate penetrating through the surface and actually getting them to go into more detail? Because a lot of people don't want to do that. It's important to actually get the detail out, because that's where you gain control and that's where you take ownership. But no one likes taking ownership of that.
Oh, absolutely. And I find that the reason that most people don't like taking that full ownership and getting specific and diving a little bit deeper is because they have been conditioned, whether it's through diet culture, whether it's through mainstream media, whether it's through bad coaching experiences or programs that they've had in the past, to associate, say, drinking on a Saturday night or having a donut on a Sunday morning with being inherently off track. So when you're able to have a more open conversation and say, hey, Ruby, how'd the weekend go? Oh, not great. I went super off track yesterday. Well, what happened? Well, I had a donut. Did you still hit your protein goal? Yeah. Did you still get your workout in? Yeah. It sounds pretty on track to me. In fact, a track that doesn't allow for all of these perfectly human moments and these fun splurges and this built-in flexibility is not a track that I would encourage you to go down at all. And a lot of times when you're telling a client this, it ends up being this light bulb moment. What do you mean? That wasn't bad. You're not going to, back to the post I put up about that very authoritative coach that might yell at somebody, or at least via email, like, hey, you shouldn't have done that, you need to hit your targets. The more, and this certainly takes time. I do want to add this caveat. It's not like a new client will have one conversation with me where I say, oh, no, it's totally okay that you ordered fries. Don't worry about it. And they go, oh, okay, all is well in the world. It takes ongoing reinforcement and support. And most importantly, no judgment or no bias from both myself and the client. So obviously, this is a big language thing, looking at how they're describing the way that they approached, bringing to their attention so they know what to look for throughout the week on their own, because it's not like you're going to be talking 24/7. And then once you have a better feel for that stuff, you can almost undo that conditioning and start to redo a different type of conditioning or reroute again to a place where they don't associate these perfectly human moments as being off track. Because then when they do that, they don't have that anxiety and that guilt and that fear surrounding having an honest conversation about how things went. It's just data. It's, oh, this is what happened. Well, here's a potential solution if you don't want that to happen again. That's it. I'm not here to twist the knife, and it doesn't serve you to twist the knife on yourself either.
I like that. Like, stop pushing the bullet further into the bullet hole, because it is making it worse for you. And this is something a lot of women struggle with. They beat themselves up before they even start. They feel like they're not worthy. They don't want to talk positive things about them because they already feel like a failure. But how are you supposed to even make any form of progress if every step of the way you're beating yourself up? If every step of the way you're not feeling good enough? And like we said before, if every step of the way you're looking for how you can be better, what more can you do? What more can you add in? Like, it's almost like as soon as people create a little bit of space, all of a sudden they're flooding it with stuff again. They don't leave the space there. But you said a word that I say all the time, and that's data. Data, data, data. Everything is data. Stop self-judging. I had a conversation with someone yesterday who has literally already completely changed the way that he approaches food. And he stayed with a friend who's an alcoholic, and he usually drinks a lot of beer. And my client said, I'm not having alcohol, thank you. And he kept saying that, and he didn't have any. But then 2 days later, he's finally back home because he made it home, and he's like, but I can't do a workout today. I only just got home. So I'm just going to have to start it all over tomorrow. And I'm like, huh? Watch the language you use with yourself, mate. Like, you can't just berate yourself for everything that you're not doing. And then he says to me, I pretty much said it like that because it's like, I am actually hard on people being hard on themselves, because you need to actually have a joke out of the fact that you are being such a dick to yourself. Stop being a dick to yourself. I want you to bring in more client examples of this as well, because I feel a lot of people can relate to clients, which is why I'm bringing up this example too. Because then what he said to me was, yeah, well, I'm just so used to this whole working hard thing. And I'm like, yeah, well, you are working pretty damn hard to me, because you've already changed a lot of things. So maybe you can think of some examples as well that can help people see how this is not serving them. Like, someone completely just said no to alcohol when he usually has 10 beers like a couple of times a week, and he usually eats fried food, and this whole time it's just been whole foods, a lot of protein. And he sent me photos of tuna, veggies, salads. Oh, but I have to start all over tomorrow because I couldn't work out today. Like, do you see the ridiculousness of the way that we speak to ourselves? And we don't realize it until we see someone else do it.
And what I find really fascinating about that is, historically speaking, when I look at conversations that I've had with, whether it's just clients or people in general, the people that are most verbally, emotionally hard on themselves are also generally the people who are least receptive to the idea that they are in fact being hard on themselves. So when somebody says, oh, I blew it, I did this, I did that, and they're labeling themselves and they're super harsh. Those are the people that when I say, hey, we need to watch the way you talk about yourself, they go, oh yeah, you know what I mean, it's not a big deal. And this is where we pause and do this simple audit. And at this point, it's become a bit of a cliched example, but would you talk to your friend the same way you're talking to yourself right now? Because that gives instant clarity on maybe you are being hard on yourself. So let's say you, Ruby, you missed a workout over the weekend and we talked on a Monday and you said, well, I missed the workout. I wouldn't say, Ruby, you're a lazy piece of shit, but that's something that I've said to myself when I missed a workout. So I can act like, oh, I can play by a different set of rules and you know what I mean. And it's not a big deal. This doesn't make a big difference. But imagine what that might do to you psychologically, emotionally. If I'm sitting here as your friend saying you're this, you're that, like that weighs on you, that discourages you. It's really, really tough. So then we look at, what do we actually do about that? How do we get somebody to stop being so damn hard on themselves after they've done this kind of audit to recognize where it's happening? This is where we look at I'm being redundant here, but this is where you look at the negativity bias that we all have. We all tend to view the world, and especially health and fitness, through a negative lens, but you also find what you're looking for. So one thing that I'll do with my clients is if they go away for a weekend and they splurge, I keep using this weekend example, but it's so relevant, and they splurged a little bit, I already know that they're entering a conversation with me thinking of all the things they could have done better. And, oh crap, I hope he's not disappointed about X, Y, and Z. So I will lead the conversation with, tell me your biggest wins from the weekend. What are you proud of? What did you do well? They hadn't even thought of this stuff. And a lot of people will initially say, I don't really feel like I had any wins. Okay. Pause for a minute. I'm actually going to make you name two now. And then, well, I guess I, didn't drink, one day at lunch when everybody else did. And I did go to bed a little bit earlier than everybody on Friday night. And before you know it, they had 9 wins. They just weren't actually looking for them. They had, half a dozen plus things to be proud of. So from an action step perspective, even if you're not working with a coach who's prompting you to do this, I do think there's tremendous upside to some form of journaling, some sort of reminder that's going off on your phone that is encouraging you to do the same thing, to look actually in the mornings is really helpful, because then you look at the world through that lens of, what am I doing well? What could I be proud of? Whereas at the end of the day, you may focus a little bit more on the negative stuff. And I think this also solves the issue for a lot of people of, you'll hear the recommendation, journal and get your thoughts out a lot, but most people don't know what the hell to journal. So maybe at the beginning of the day, you would write, well, today might be a win if I did X, Y, and Z. And at the end of the day, you would say, well, I'm proud I did this. And this didn't go perfectly according to plan, but I'm going to talk to myself the way I would talk to a friend and say, it didn't go perfectly according to plan, but I also got this done. And that's something to get really excited about.
And it's also about figuring out how you could have approached it better next time. Because something I was also thinking of I'll actually give another example to that before I talk about that. I had it's not just what you did well, fitness and nutrition wise. Like I had a conversation with a girl yesterday and I'm like, how are you going? And then she replies and goes, well, I'm pretty mad at myself. I didn't go to the gym. And then my response was, okay, so what is a big win from today? She's like, actually, no, I'm like, what went well today? And she's like, I got to spend time with my kid. Don't really get to do that much. I'm like, oh, what did you do? We watched a movie. We don't get to chill out and watch movies that often. Like, this is a win. Let's actually do this a lot more. This is adding to your life. And this is going to help make you see that fitness and what you do with your food can fit into life. And it's going to give you more of a purpose because you want to show up better for your kid. And you want to be more present without always thinking about food, about your body, about hating how you feel in your skin. Because this stuff, this transformation stuff, is about you transforming your whole life. But back to that other example, it's like you can't just keep shrugging off weekends and shrugging off nights of binging or splurging or whatever it is and say, well, I'm back on track today. Because how often are you going to do that? And then you wonder why you're not at the goal that you want to be at. You need to actually reflect on it and not just shrug it off. Why did it go wrong? Who was around you? What environment were you in? How often does it happen? You need to actually dig into everything around that event to make it less impactful next time if it's something that's going to keep occurring. Because consistency requires you showing up more often than you don't. But if something that big happens regularly, it is going to set you back, and then you're going to wonder why you're not here, why you're not there. You're going to feel like a failure. It all comes back to the conversation we had before about getting uncomfortable with ourselves.
I'm glad you brought up the shrugging off the weekends concept, because I think that almost single-handedly in a lot of cases holds so many people back from making progress, because they're not willing to face the data or the decision makings, which obviously starts with a very non-judgmental, unbiased assessment, right, that we just mentioned. But from there, we have to keep in mind that Saturday and Sunday alone is about 28% of your entire week. If we add a Friday night out to this calculation, Friday night to Sunday night is 33% of your week. Imagine if I was your financial advisor and you came to me and said, Sam, I should probably keep a budget. I'm in debt and I want to get out of it. And I said, okay, that's great. And you start off the month strong and you're keeping your budget. But then with 10 days left to go in the month, 1/3 of the month, you just spend on absolutely whatever you want. And then we meet again on the first of the next month. And I say, hey, what happened the last 10 days? Wasn't my best, but starting fresh this month. We can't just throw away 1/3 of the month and expect you to thrive financially. That would never rationally cross anybody's mind of, yeah, I didn't plan, I didn't budget, I didn't look at any of my expenses, any of my statements, nor do I want to talk about it. But I'm just going to start fresh on the first of the month and expect to get out of debt. And on a much more micro scale, that's exactly what people do on the weekends, whether they don't want to dive back into the things that they feel like didn't go super well. Other common examples would be, I'm going to stop weighing in or stop tracking my progress via measurements, via photos the second I have a meal out or don't feel like I'm doing perfectly. Another big one, I tracked and planned all my food all week, but I had an impromptu night out with Ruby and I ate a little bit more than expected. So my fitness pal is going to stay in my pocket because I don't know, and nor do I really want to know what's going on. So people tend to shy away from these accountability sources and assuming that, again, there's no guilt in place, there's no shame. That is the equivalent of, it's one of the worst things you do. It's the equivalent of taking the last 10 days off from every month, from checking prices, expenses, all that, and then still expecting to do well with your finances. It's just not going to happen.
It's something that we need to take into account about zooming out and having, it's really hard when you're on the inside to have that objective view, which I guess is where coaches can come in as well, to be that mirror and to get you to dig deeper, because so many people aren't willing to dig deep enough. And like, people say that tracking is obsessive, but like, you track your finances to stay on track. And what's like, I will always say this, what is more obsessive, you tracking your food or you being so obsessed with the next best diet, spending money on this, spending money on that, feeling like you're hopeless, feeling like a failure, hating who you are in your skin, hating how you feel in clothes, not actually showing up to be your best self, missing out on opportunities? Like, what is more obsessive out of that? Like, the more that you get this, I guess, educational view, the better and easier you find it to then buffer a lot of what you say. But then again, we are emotional beings, we're human beings. So we can know all the right things to do, but still not do it because it innately goes against what we prefer to do because it's comfortable. And whole tangent, but this is actually perfect for you to talk about. Something that we find ourselves uncomfortable to do is to actually eat enough and chase muscle growth, not just chasing burning calories or chasing the feeling of working hard. And this actually is related in a way as well, because it's like we always want this feeling of working hard. How you do one thing is how you do everything. So you feel like because everything needs to feel hard, that's the way that you approach your sessions. So that's the way you approach your nutrition. But you don't realize it's seasons, it's phasic.
Absolutely. So if somebody was to go a little bit deeper with their goals and list them on a piece of paper, I want this to be different in my life, whether it's I want to be stronger, whether it's I want to look more toned and more lean, yada, 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 the list goes on. The vast majority of those goals would actually, I want to have more energy. I want to have more social flexibility. I want a better relationship with food. I want better recovery, better sleep. This whole thing, I could go on and on. Most of those goals are actually best served pursuing a muscle growth goal compared to a fat loss goal. And that's not to say there's not a time and place for fat loss. It's what I specialize in. I know you do a tremendous amount of that, the transformation work, but that's a small piece of this overall pie of the transformation process. So if you keep doing the things that you've always done and you expect to move the needle on all those other goals, that's not a reasonable expectation. And if somebody, and this goes back to the educational component and looking at the data and looking at kind of the X and O's that I think sometimes coaches feel like they don't want to bore clients with. But I forget where I got this expression that education drives adherence. If I just tell somebody, hey, you've been dieting too long, you need to take a break, bring your calories up, scale's going to go up, but deal with it. And I don't explain why and what's going on and what the upside is of all this. I'm going to say, hell no. They're just going to find another coach who's going to let, quote unquote, let them diet and do, 1,000 calories, no carbs, this, that, the other. Whereas if I say, all right, Ruby, you came to me, I understand that ultimately you want to kind of tone up a little bit more, and we'll hear that all the time. But in order to have the look that you're after, in order to be a little bit stronger, because say that's something that you mentioned that you want to focus on, to have more social flexibility, all that stuff, you'd actually be better off increasing calories a little bit. And then I'm going to kind of lay out this roadmap for how things will eventually go, because it's okay to almost sideline your fat loss goals for a little bit. It's not like we can never revisit that. It's just right now your goals are best served pursuing the other stuff. And if somebody knows exactly what to expect, not that we want to put hard dates on things, but a general time frame for how long you might be pursuing something, when you can shift a little bit, and what that path looks like, you're much more likely to follow through. Take, for example, somebody who absolutely hates conditioning, and we took them to a bottom of a hill and said, well, you're going to do hill sprints because you're due for it, because you haven't really done it basically ever. Well, when can I stop? Not telling you. They're not going to want to go hard. They're not going to run up that hill because they don't know exactly what to expect. Whereas if I say, okay, you're going to run halfway up the hill to that telephone pole, you're going to rest for 2.5 minutes, then you're going to sprint all the way to the top, you'll walk back down, and then here's how we do the cool down. Okay, I can get behind that. I know what comes next. And for a lot of people, I think the idea of increasing calories, actually eating enough, fueling your body, building muscle is never something they've really thought about before. What do you mean I want the scale to actually go up a little bit? I'm not going to do anything about it. So when there's more education behind that, more specificity, and it becomes less of this ambiguous, scary kind of concept, and people fully appreciate through education the upside of doing it, then they're willing to be temporarily uncomfortable, but far less uncomfortable than being in the state of constantly trying to diet and kind of run themselves into the ground forever.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that you related that to the fact of actually eating more, where it's just like, yeah, well, it's funny that people don't actually see it in the fat loss direction, because fat loss is so much harder. Yet people go freaking running marathons up a bloody hill versus sprints up a hill when it comes to fat loss. And this, like, I wish they actually listened, but I don't want my clients using the scale for that reason, because it starts off with good intentions, because we all start off with good intentions. Hey, we want to see the scale go down, but then you become so attached to seeing a number go down that you cannot let go of that never-ending chase of numbers going down. And I know, because I was there and I wasn't even friggin' obese, and I was still attached to seeing this number on the scale go down, to a point where I didn't even want to see it leave a certain range. Like if it left a certain range, I'd freak out. Like, is that really a life to live? Being a slave to the scale? Don't fucking use the scale. But regardless, like, it's the educational piece and seeing that it is there. It's not just the physical of, okay, you want to build the muscle as well. You guys need to realize that there's a whole mental side to this as well. Like I said, you can't do a marathon up a hill. It is mentally hard to go hard in fat loss, but when you actually do it right, the fat melts off. And if you're not in a great relationship with food, and if you're blowing it every weekend, you're probably better off served chasing this other goal until you heal your relationship with food, and you're mentally not dieting like you have for the past 3 years. Probably most people have been mentally dieting for the last 30 years, 20 years. Yeah. So it's like, get your mindset away from dieting for a while. Get yourself ready mentally. It's not just physically, guys. Because if you want this to last, and if you want to enjoy the process and be able to say no to cake, then do it the right way, because it's so easy to say no to cake. It's so easy to say no to French toast and ice cream when you know, like we said, this is just for a short stint. This is not going to be for your whole life like you've been doing it the last 20, 30, 40 till death's end. Because we got brought up that way. So I guess this also fits into the post we originally wanted to talk about, like forever ago, willpower. When you realize this, that it's a part of the journey, you don't need willpower anymore, because you've become that person. you've mentally got yourself ready. You realize that fat loss is a stint. It's not a life sentence. It's not a months and months and months on end. There are times where you can come out of a diet break. It's okay if you enjoy yourself on this weekend and maybe one in quite a few weekends time, because that still is okay if you splurge those weekends, because it's still the consistency and you can fit in these fun foods, but you have less flexibility when you're in a fat loss phase. Knowing that, you don't really need this willpower. You don't really need this motivation.
Yeah, the visual that I kind of have in my head when I have somebody who's considering a diet is that it's the equivalent of most people saying, well, I'm going to drive across the country. But if you look at the car they're about to pursue this drive in, the check engine lights are on, they have maybe a flat tire, they need an oil change, they're driving on one spare tire, there's a hole in the back seat, you have all these other things where technically speaking, we can get the car to start moving. We can technically make a little, progress if we're measuring it in terms of you actually driving some distance. But nobody would ever look at that scenario and say, yeah, that's a really good way to pursue this cross-country road trip. That is my transformation journey, because it's going to be absolutely miserable, even if I do somehow manage, which is extremely unlikely, somehow manage to make some good distance here. But in most cases, if not all of them, the car's just going to shit the bed a little bit. And this isn't to compare any human being to a crappy car, of course, but just to give you a little bit of a visual of the way most people start to embark their journey. They're just so hell-bent on, it's fine, I know the check engine light's on, I know this is going on, but I just want to get moving. Ultimately, and the irony is, if you want quick results, and that's why you keep doing this over and over without preparing for a diet psychologically, logistically, physiologically, it actually takes you more time long-term to get results, because you fall into the yo-yo thing. So it's, oh, I did this last year, and it didn't, and it worked for me. Well, no, it didn't, because you're exactly where you started, considering another fast and furious diet where your relationship with food is not in a good place. You've never taken any time off from psychologically dieting. So you're going 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 1 forward, 2 back. And 3 years later, or 30 years later, as you mentioned, Ruby, you're ultimately in the same place. So this is another scenario where there's no downside to actually taking the time to prepare for this diet, to get yourself in a position where food doesn't feel so scarce or so urgent or take up so much bandwidth. And that's not to say there will ever be a scenario where you can pay zero attention to food. But when you're entering a diet, if you're currently pre-diet obsessing over every last minute detail, all of the numerical stuff, and I'm a big fan of numbers. I have my clients track weekly body weight averages. We look at trends over time. We look at measurements. We look at, calories. We look at a lot of that stuff. But if before the diet even begins, your relationship with numbers like that is completely horrible, that's like this check engine light example. And we need to address that first. And when people have a hard time buying into that, this is where I just remind them, hey, if we don't do this, you might get results a little bit and your before and after will be all nice. But what about your after? What are you going to do 6 months or, 16 months from now? You're probably going to be back where you started. And it is completely physically and psychologically exhausting to go diet after diet after diet, never truly believing. If you had somebody take a polygraph test, and most people starting a diet, if I asked them, they had to be honest, Ruby, do you believe in your heart of hearts that this diet is going to go well? You're going to transform your body and your health, and you're never going to look back. You'll never have to diet again. Nobody actually believes that. And how sad is that? And it's okay to have some doubts, of course, but most people, if they're being honest, have no confidence whatsoever to go well. But for some reason, they're still not open to this alternative approach where they're addressing all this other stuff first.
Because they don't stop to think. No one stops to pause. No one actually just stops to be with themselves, to get real about what the real thing it is that you want. I actually might post it now. I was trying to do a reel where I was just chatting about this exact thing, because it's almost like if we don't feel like we can succeed, we shoot ourselves in the foot before we start. So we don't even stop to consider the fact that it's our very approach and mindset that is holding us back. Because if you're not getting clear on the life that you actually want to live, how you want to feel, and instead you're focusing on everything that you want to avoid, what do you think is going to come of that? Like, you feed your focus, and if you're feeding your focus on how shit you feel, here's another one. Actually, you can talk about this one after I finish too, is where people think of everything they did in the past and all the failures of the past and the fact that they've been quote unquote fat their whole lives and all the things that are negative. If that is where you are living, where are you giving yourself even a chance to succeed? Because you're not speaking any positive, any hope into your future. You're shooting yourself before you start. And any effort that you put in, you know what's really funny? Everything that we've been talking about is the cost of inaction. But every effort that you put in is going to be shortchanged with, oh, but it was only this. Oh, but I just did that. Oh, but what can I do better? If you're always just seeking that next best thing, if you're always just seeking what, like that outcome, you're not really enjoying the process. And if you don't enjoy the process, where's the happiness there? How are you going to be happy when you get to the outcome? Are you even going to be happy? Are you even going to be happy? Are you even going to find fulfillment there? How do you know? Because I can sure as hell tell you, oh, this is what I've been wanting to talk about for ages. Okay, you're hearing it here first. Okay, think of it this way. You have a wedding planned. You're getting so prepped up for the wedding. The wedding is going to be this fantabulous thing that you put so much effort into. Wedding comes, celebrations, you go on your honeymoon, everything, your whole, like, how long does it take to plan a wedding? Like a whole year? Ages. You put all this effort, all this stress, the energy that goes into a day, sunk cost effect again. All of these resources, all of these finances, everything that goes into this wedding. It's almost like your whole life is now planning this wedding. Wedding done, honeymoon done, now what? Post-wedding blues. We all know that. And it's almost like comp prep, post-comp prep blues, because I've been there. And I've had to actually help a lot of people through the same thing where as soon as that comp prep day comes, now what? Because you just aimed so much for this goal. You put everything into getting to your leanest. The worst thing about it is that when you're your leanest, which may not be stage prep lean, but it is the leanest that you've been, and the most restricted that you've been, your whole body perception changes. Your whole perception on what progress looks like, on what results look like, on what normal looks like changes. Because now all that time, all that energy that you put into something completely is gone now. Like there's nothing more to strive to. And that's when like I spoke on your podcast. If you haven't listened to my podcast on his podcast, it's go listen. But that's when you become a shell. You're just chasing external outcomes, never feeling fulfilled. You can take that so many ways. So take it away.
Yes, I have like 9 different thoughts going in so many different directions. But what initially comes to mind for me is, this reinforces the importance of prior to dieting. It is because if you ask most people, why are you dieting? The surface level immediate answer is, I'd like to lose 30 pounds, or I want to be this weight. And it doesn't go beyond that. And then if you push them, they might go a little deeper and say, oh, I just want to look and feel a little bit better. And we never really typically get beyond that. But if you're willing, going back to this conversation of going deeper, if you're willing to go deeper than that and look at how do you feel like your life will be meaningfully different as you achieve this goal? What do you think is going to happen? Well, if going back to the conversation as well of finding what you're looking for, if you keep your eyes up and you're looking at all the things that you're hoping to get out of, whether it's, getting stage lean, for example, or hitting a certain weight goal or whatever, those wins are likely available to you prior to you actually reaching that end goal. So you have all this upside along the way of, well, I want to lose, say, 20 pounds of body fat because I feel like it'll make me more confident and higher energy, yada, yada, yada. Well, there's a good chance, again, if you're looking along the way proactively, those were the things you're telling me you wanted out of fat loss. Well, it's quite possible that when you're 3.5 pounds down, you already feel more confident, not just because of a slight visual change, but because you're now a person who is committing to something and actually following through with it. So all the things, and, I could give a million examples here, but all the things that you're telling me you wanted out of, say, fat loss, if we're using this example, you're actually having these things become available to you prior to reaching this often arbitrary numerical goal. The other thing that does is it frees you from the shackles of being attached to your all-time low weight or your all-time leanest look, because all these other things that we identified proactively are available to you on the other side of your leanest weight at the tail end of a diet. Because as you know, maintenance is not a specific number. So say you lose, I don't know, 25 pounds and you go from 200 to 175 and you feel like, all right, I feel pretty good here. Well, why do you feel good here? Well, I'm higher energy. My workouts are better, yada, yada, yada. And then maintenance might be up to even 178, 182. It's a range, it's a fluctuating number. And if you hadn't thought about all those other things that you're getting out of your goal, you now feel like you're regressing. You now feel like you're failing. You feel like all these bad things are happening. But if you have these alternative benchmarks, you can say, well, I finished my diet at 175 and now I'm 182, but all the things that I wanted to get out of fat loss are still constants in my life. There's still things that are available to me right now. So I don't actually have to stress about this. So this isn't to say not to, have a somewhat clear process and outcome-based goal. You and I talked a lot about process versus outcome-based goals. And I don't think the outcome stuff, as you mentioned, is entirely useless, right? It gives us a North Star or direction to head down. We have to keep our heads up along the way. Otherwise, our entire identity and self-worth and source of confidence is going to be attached to this very hyper specific outcome based thing, which again, I called them shackles for a reason. That can be really, really challenging.
This was the illusion that I said in a different podcast, and that's you can have all of the fuel, all of the drive, all of the motivation, whatever it is. But if you aren't placing that outcome in the right direction, yes, that's the thing. You set the direction, you have to set that as the North Star is always the North Star. Everything else around that will change because things don't stay the same. I mean, look at the last 2 years. We didn't expect that. No one expected that. But the North Star stays the North Star. And if you attach your identity to these external things, you will lose yourself in the process. What happened to people that identified as a power lifter and then all of a sudden their strength gyms were taken away, or whatever it was that was taken away from them. They don't have anything to cling to anymore. Clinging to things leaves us as a shell because we don't have an internal drive that we can then direct in other directions, because it's not about the food. It's not about the training. Like I said, it is about everything that makes you the person that you want to become. And until you get clear on that drive that you have in the car, you're going to actually, if the car actually leaves the freaking driveway to start with, because you need to actually have the right fuel and make sure that your car's functioning. Say your car's functioning. Say that you got enough fixing on the car to actually get it to move. Are you going to circle the block? Are you going to keep doing the same yo-yo shit that you've been doing for ages because you just paid however much to get the car moving a little bit? Or say you fix the car completely. Cool, it's ready to go. Let's go and do a 12-week fix because I want things now. And you don't want to deal with the under issues. Oh, I just spent $3 million fixing my car. I ain't going to worry about the other shit. I'm just going to keep circling the block.
That's where you look at where your time, taking the time to assess and audit where these resources, we've talked about the sunk cost effect a few times now, where your resources are best directed. So many people feel like they're wasting time if they pause to think about this stuff and, they dive a little bit deeper and they're taking a little bit more time to formulate their plan. They feel like, I just want to go, go, go. But then you run the risk, as you mentioned, actually, I believe it's called the law of the slight edge, or the slight edge principle, where if you take a plane that's about to take off and you direct it, I'm talking like a millimeter off to the left, within a couple of hours, it'll be thousands of miles off from its original course because you didn't take the time to make sure that it was directed in the right place to begin with. So this goes back to this recurring theme of a lot of people are hesitant to do this. They hear it and they go, I know I should give it a little bit more thought. I should get to the root of what I'm hoping to get out of this whole transformation journey and what I want my identity to really be. But if you don't do that, you run the risk of this plane analogy of being slightly off course in terms of where you're directing these resources. And the resources are now spent, but you're thousands of miles from where you're hoping to end up. And now you have to use the same amount of resources to get back to where you ultimately wanted to be, had you taken the time to identify that in the first place.
I love that because it's so true. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. Like, people aren't willing to sit with themselves and to get uncomfortable because it's a waste of time. But what's more of a waste of time? Spending the next 1, 3, 5 years doing the same shit, ending up in the same place, or taking a day, not even a day, maybe 2 days, to actually get clear on your direction and on the cost of inaction and of how much different life will be when you implement the things that you know you need to implement, even though they are uncomfortable. And I know that you mentioned this as well, where people have contradicting goals, where it's just like, I want to have more energy in the day. I want to go to the gym in the morning. I want to have more time freed up at night, but they still want watch Netflix until friggin' 11 p.m., 12 a.m., midnight. And then they wonder why they're sleeping in, they're not going to the gym, and then they keep repeating the same shit and not showing up as their best selves because they aren't willing to just do the hard shit and make it who they are, to switch off Netflix earlier so that they can reinstall a new pattern that serves them, so you stop feeling so crap throughout the day. And the other thing I want you to talk about on that as well is, because Instagram is bloody amazing at being annoying lately, that is it just me, or is there like a rise in 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, little whatever, like, I can talk with this whole like single ladies just living at home doing shit, but I don't do this. There are so many people out there that don't work outside of home, that have all the time in the world. They don't have kids. They're either single or they have a partner, but they don't have kids, making extravagant recipes with all these ingredients, making things freaking, I called it a flavor orgasm in your mouth. Like, you don't need to have an orgasm in your mouth every single time that you eat. Yet people are pushing these things out, and then all of a sudden, I can't eat that great. My meal doesn't look really good. I can't even celebrate this meal because it doesn't look like this person on Instagram. And you wrote a post, which is the one that I just pulled up, where it's just like, okay, cool. So you want to eat this fancy? Be prepared to have extra time tracking your food, have extra time worrying about whether your goals, your actions are in line with the results that you want. Extra time prepping, extra time cleaning, more money spent on grocery shopping, more decisions to make, probably bloody ordering a pizza because you didn't anticipate staying back at work one day.
So this brings up two really distinct points that I think are super important to talk about. Number one is considering context from your information sources. So absolutely, if you look at the overwhelming majority of people who are posting fitness content on social media, I'm generalizing, stereotyping a little bit here, but it's a lot of people in their mid-20s whose whole lives revolve around literally whether or not they have abs, or like, the average person in the course of a week is not thinking about how defined their rear delts are. But a lot of people they're taking information from, that's an ongoing thing for them. And that's not to say somebody who doesn't have kids, or somebody who's really young, or somebody who doesn't have a lot of responsibility can't give some advice, but you do have to consider some good advice, I should say, but you do have to consider that context of, are they going to be able to give something that's actually applicable to your day to day? So when I started training people, Ruby, I was actually 16, 17 years old. And I know that sounds crazy that people would trust me with anything at that point, but that's when I started doing sessions. I was 16, 17. And a lot of the recommendations that I gave people at the time were, well, I learned that this is technically optimal for sleep, so here's the bedtime ritual that you need to use, Mrs. Jones. But what that didn't account for in my young, naive, inexperienced brain is that Mrs. Jones has a kid that's going to come in and have a nightmare. And she's not going to say, well, my 16-year-old trainer, Sam, said it's suboptimal for sleep for you to come in the room, so get the hell out, little Billy, you're disrupting my sleep hygiene. So all this to say, consider the context of the information source and make sure they're considering your unique and potential obstacles before you pursue anything. It looks like you had a thought on that before I move forward. Is there something you wanted to add?
on that same note where it's the context, it's almost like when you start a new job. I can't remember where I saw this, but you start a new job and there's someone that's been working there for like 10, 15 years. The advice they're dishing out is now outdated. It's stuff that doesn't serve you right now. Like people saying freaking, I don't know what's out there, like carb timing, insulin, this, I don't know, whatever it is, stuff that they haven't yet renewed their knowledge on, versus the new person that comes in with more education, that, well, not even you, but someone that's always studying, someone that's always refreshing their educational research base. But on that other side, not, you can't just go off research, because research comes out like 10 years after something's already been friggin' prophesized in practical application. But there's a difference there as well with knowing where the context is.
Absolutely. So this is totally another direction we could go in. So I'm going to say two quick thoughts here. One, with that, in terms of auditing information sources, considering context, practical things for people to be looking for. Number one, you can kind of tell from the content somebody's putting out in itself, if they're suggesting this 3-hour bedtime ritual with 19, it's clear that they're not the 19 steps, I should say. It's clear they're probably not the person for you. There's not a whole lot of information, even if you want to, and this is the hurdle for a lot of people, but I want to look like her, but I want to look like him. You got to be honest about whether or not the information that they're giving you is something you can actually apply. So I think that in itself can be obvious. Looking at the continuing education component, certifications can hold a little weight, but honestly, as long as you're doing some form of, whether it's, courses, whether it's conferences, whatever the case may be, that they're staying up on this stuff. And then the clients that they're showcasing are, if it's a 22-year-old posting a bunch of other 22-year-olds who also don't have a whole lot going on, or are they posting things that you feel like, oh, I can identify, not necessarily with the look. Again, I don't want to get caught up in the whole, I want to look like that client looks, but what are their pain points? What are their obstacles? So they said, maybe in this client spotlight thing, this client came to me and they were struggling with blah, 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 blah. And now they're doing this. Oh, okay. That's kind of the same trajectory I want to go on. So I think that's, a handful of those, I should say, are a handful of practical things that people can look for when they're auditing information sources. But I did want to add one other thought to, you'd brought up the meal complexity thing, where a lot of people in the same breath will say, well, I get really bored with, eating, mostly the same meals over and over. And, I want to mix things up a little bit. I'm like, okay, that's fine. On one side of this coin, you're telling me that you prefer food variety, that you get really, really bored eating the same things and you don't want to eat chicken that often. That's fine. But the other side of what you're telling me now means more cognitive bandwidth, like literally just more thought on a daily basis of how to potentially hit your nutritional targets, potentially more time consuming cooking, potentially more money spent on a variety of groceries. That's the stuff that comes with it. Are you okay with that? Well, no, I don't want that either. Well, there's an expression: if you chase two rabbits, both escape. And it can sound cliche, but that's the reality for a lot of people. Is I get really bored with my meals. And, this is, I saw this recipe on Pinterest that I want to do, blah, blah, blah. On the other side of the coin, they're saying, well, I don't really want to spend a lot of time in the kitchen, and, tracking your food is too time consuming and daunting, this, that, the other. So this is our job as coaches. And obviously, if you're not working with a coach, you have to do a little bit of a self audit here to look at, are your goals at odds with each other? Because then you're not moving the needle on either of them. And perhaps, and this would be a good conversation for us, perhaps the most common example of chasing two rabbits at the same time, running in two directions, is I want to lose weight as quickly as possible. And I want to keep the weight off once and for all. Because guess what? The strategies you're using for each of those goals are, for the most part, I would say 80% at odds with each other. So to a degree, you're going to have to pick one or the other. And obviously, we don't want to send somebody down that yo-yo dieting path.
Why do I have a feeling that now this is going to just go on forever? There are so many things I want to say to that. Like, it's not just the fact that you want to lose weight as quickly as possible and then you want to keep it off forever. It's like that whole outcomes thing. If you're just focusing on chasing the outcome of losing the weight, you become a shell in the process. Like, you don't bring the life with you. Your default settings are bullshit and you still left them behind. So unless you actually go through the phases and know how to eat at maintenance, and a lot of people do this thing where maybe it's not the right time to start yet. Maybe I need to write for the right wait time. Okay, cool. Not this week. this week's going to be crazy, so I'll be on track next week again. Like, no, that's when you actually need to work harder on how to navigate these things. You should be actually using the moments where life is tougher with a coach, with some guidance, because handling the toughest shit makes it so much easier when things are smooth sailing, which is actually a lot more rare than when things are actually tough, especially if you're a mother, especially if you have a high demanding job, and especially if you're a perfectionist, because no matter what you do, no matter what you say about it's going to be calmer next month, it never comes. I can tell you it never comes, because I can admit to that same thing where she's like, oh, it'll be calmer in March. Yeah, bullshit. This month was my busiest. It'll be calmer in April. In April, I'll probably say, bullshit. I just made that my busiest month. Like, we always find ways to busy ourselves unless we make room for it. But yeah, what did I just say? I do the same thing, but you know what I didn't skip? I didn't skip a single day of being within ballpark of my macros. But to be honest, I don't even track my food anymore, because I literally eat the same meals every single freaking day, because I love my food. And if I want to change things up, guess what I do? Actually bring in some examples as well, because examples are amazing. I might actually do a full day of eating, but all my meals are pretty much the same. Actually, they're all the same. The only thing that I would do different sometimes is if I'm really hungry one morning, I'll eat half of a bread roll that I also have with my dessert, because my dessert's really big. Like, or I might move one of my wheat bixes, which is cereal. I don't know if people have wheat bix in America or UK, but wheat bix from my breakfast, and I might put that into my dessert, because I have a little bit of wheat bix in both. But the only other thing that I do where I change my meals is my third meal, which is potato or a bread roll. So what did I do? Protein equal. Actually, everything is equal. All I did was calculate the calories that are in the potato and make the potato equal the calories in the bread roll. So if I want potato one day, I have chicken potato coleslaw mayonnaise. If I want bread roll one day, I have a chicken mayo bread roll. Like, make shit simple where you have the same type of macros and calories for a meal, and you have different alternatives for it, as long as the protein is the same, which should be freaking 10 times higher than you think it should be, because a lot of people don't eat enough protein, which you can bring that up later too. That comes down to, do you want to keep the weight off for good, or do you want fast weight loss? Because you need to learn the non-negotiables. You need to learn the habits. You need to learn when it's okay to slip back a little, but when you actually need to go full force. Like, you need to learn how to toggle all of these phases, and your dream body doesn't come in one cycle. And going back to that, like, chasing the shell, and the fact that I always went after outcomes, bring in a lot more examples. It actually really helps. But the fact that I was always chasing over outcomes, regardless of where my body was, I was never happy, because I was a shell. I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I didn't even know what I was chasing anymore. I literally used to say, I don't know what the fuck I want. Just give me something. I want this. No, I want this. But then every single thing that I said I wanted didn't come from a place of what I actually wanted, because I was still chasing, I want to be lean. I don't want to get fat. This is powerful. And it was almost like I gave myself the self-fulfilling prophecy of, no, I love food too much. Restriction mindset. Anytime that I let myself go, or anytime I don't have something that I'm stubborn about, using stubbornness as my thing, I'll let myself go. I'll go back into old habits. So no, I'm stubborn on these goals. I'm stubborn on this. But it wasn't something that actually gave me purpose. It was me being stubborn about something that I used as my excuse and my justification for chasing something. But being stubborn about it meant that I didn't have something that was going to make me enjoy who I was, what my body was capable of, and I was still living in such deprivation regardless. And my body couldn't follow it if my mind wasn't there.
Ruby, I feel like we have this running queue of 15 topics that are now on deck for us to tackle, so many directions to go in. But two, you had so many great points there, so much great information. Two that I'd love to, I want to say expand on, but briefly touch upon a little bit more, going a little bit back, the idea of waiting for a good time to start. And this is for any variation or version of, things are really nuts this week. When the dust settles, I'll be able to try harder next week, or this month just really isn't a good time for me right now. But when things die down a little bit, insert 48 variations of that. The list goes on. There's so many things that people say. I put out a video about this once with an actual client, and she's absolutely crushing it, by the way. But she was hesitant to sign up for coaching because she's like, I'm about to move. I've lived in the same house for X amount of years. And I feel like mid-move probably isn't a good time to commit to a program. And I'm not a used car salesman, but the point I made to her is, look, you're having this period now, the season of life of, well, you're about to gear up for this move. But then when you're actually in the house, we're just getting settled in the home. And at the time of year that it was about to enter the holidays. So then it's, the holidays are nuts for me. And you know how things are in the new year. And then it's spring cleaning, and it's, getting ready for the summer. And then the summer's vacation. And before you know it, it's the same damn time the next calendar year. So if you build the skill sets now specifically to operate imperfectly, or so you think of, what does 60% look like? What does 80% look like? And you get really damn good at operating at 70%, 85%, depending on the season of life. Well, now in those very, very rare seasons where all of life's traffic lights turn green, now you have all this, these skills, and you have this framework to put your foot on the gas and really amplify your results. But if you do that thing where you wait for things to settle down and you wait for a good time to start, or, again, there's so many examples we can use here, you're actually reinforcing this all or nothing approach, this I'm either on or I'm off, that you're telling me that you want to stop doing. You're telling me that you want to stop being a perfectionist and you don't want to be in a yo-yo cycle. But 2 seconds later, you're telling me that this week is nuts. And when things calm down a little bit, I'll be able to, and the expression actually I think I hear the most is, wait till I can fully commit. Well, guess what? There are very few times in life you'll be able to fully commit. I'd much rather have you 80% commit, 60% commit, depending on what's going on. So that was the first thing I wanted to touch upon. But the other one, before I forget, you had mentioned adjusting your meals, your staple meals. And I think the biggest mistake that people make with meal variation and complexity is thinking about a plate strictly in terms of the numbers, especially when somebody's dieting with the goal of fat loss. It is purely, how many calories does this have? How much protein does this have? If they're tracking a full set of macros, carbs and fats, of course, as well. And they're just tinkering those. But what happens when we get rid of that numerical feedback at the end of a diet? Most people, I would venture to say, probably, I don't want to tell people what they should or shouldn't do, but most people would do best not tracking for the rest of their lives. That's generally the end game that we want people in, is they're not having to pull out MyFitnessPal every single time they're eating. But if the only thing you're focusing on mid-diet is, well, is it reduced fat or reduced sugar, or what do the numbers tell me, or what does it say in MyFitnessPal, and you're not also paying attention to plate structure, this is the big thing here, is plate structure, then it's unlikely you do well when you get rid of that numerical feedback. So one of the things that I will have my clients do proactively is, yes, we monitor calories, we look at protein, all that other good stuff, but we also look at the plate and say, what's the composition of your plate right here? Is it, you have a protein, you have a carb source, perhaps more carbs before and after your workout. Did you get some fat in there as well for hormonal health, nutrient digestion, etc.? Did you work in splurges from time to time? Because then when you're looking at your nutrition, your meals through that lens of as well, it's so easy to make adjustments without the numbers telling you what to do. And most people, again, you pull up MyFitnessPal at the end of their diet, they reach this goal weight supposedly, and they stop using MyFitnessPal, and they've never paid attention to this stuff before, so they don't know how to make adjustments. Whereas if you do look at it in advance toward the tail end of your diet, you start to phase off of, say you're tracking MyFitnessPal, you bring your calories back up a little bit, and you go, okay, well, this plate structure is, my protein is, let's say, steak, my carb is, rice, my fat is the olive oil that I cooked everything in, and I got a vegetable, asparagus. Well, if I want to make an adjustment, I'm going to switch my primary protein source from steak to salmon. And now I don't need that numerical feedback to go, oh my God, is this, putting me over these calories that I'm no longer tracking? It's still meeting this benchmark. So in short, that wasn't a quick point at all, but in short, looking at a meal is almost like a system, a template, a general structure, rather than exclusively looking at the numbers, which may work short term, but ultimately it does you a disservice if you're not looking at the general framework for what makes up a satisfying, nutritious meal.
Yeah, I actually have a file in my inner circle that has a meal plan template and how to structure your meal. And it just yesterday, someone's like, I'm going away for the next 4 days. And because she's in a fat loss phase, like in fat loss phases, I will always say you should track your calories, but when you're in maintenance, which is where you should live your life, talking about what Sam said, I will talk about this first, but because she's going on holidays for a while, I'm just like, just use the meal plan template, because the plate template, not meal plan template, the plate template, which is pretty much eating most of your plate, like 3/4 of your plate, veggies, and the rest protein, and sparsely have a little bit of fats throughout the day, because everything we eat pretty much will come with some source of fat. So I don't like prioritizing fats at all when we're away. Prioritize the veggies, prioritize the protein. The fats will find their way into your diet. I can promise you that. But that was that one. The other one is, yes, when you are in a fat loss phase, it becomes a little bit more crucial for you to start tracking your food adamantly. But this is the thing, this is why you need to know how to actually approach the journey, because most of your time should be spent at maintenance if you want to keep the weight off. And that is when you learn how to eat to maintain your weight. And yes, you will still need to track, you will still need to have some effort if it is the first time and if you're new to this, and you will probably have to for at least a year, because you need to gather competence and confidence in different situations. But then as the years go, maybe like year 2, year 3, you gain so much freedom and flexibility. You don't even really have to track all that much, if at all. And it becomes, I love tracking, so I still track. It's just the fact that I eat the same thing every day. But if I want to change something up, I know how to change it up to reflect that meal plan. So we can plan and track a structure for ourselves, and then not really need to go back into tracking it all that much for quite a while until we want to change something up again. But then we need to also know how to do the tracking for when something comes up, like if we're lacking energy in some places, if our digestion shit, if there are things that are propping up like the lights on the dashboard of a car, maybe we need to go back to tracking everything again, just to see what's kind of going askew, and then try to sort things out there, which is something that I have with one of my advanced clients. It's like, can you actually track everything for me, please, for like a month, so we can see what's going on, and we can see where this energy is, and we can see what we can like sort out a little. Because other times it's just, she eats like me, like she eats practically the same thing every day.
So many directions here. I have like 9 different thoughts in the tip of my tongue, but one that I wanted to touch upon a little bit, you had mentioned, obviously developing skills mid-diet in a way that put you in a position to successfully maintain your results. And I want to re-emphasize a point I made earlier, that maintenance is not maintaining your all-time lowest body weight for the rest of your life. That is not the metric of successful maintenance, which is a total side tangent I could go on. But one of the strategies that I'll use to make sure that my clients are set up for success, life after dieting, the after photo, is almost pulling the rug out from under them mid-diet, where if they've been tracking really diligently for, say, I don't know, 9 weeks or something, I'll say, all right, for this weekend, I want you to maybe just track your choices, not the numbers themselves, but the choices in the notes app on your phone or pen and paper. Or maybe don't track anything at all for the next 4 days, because the last thing I want is for somebody to feel like completely helpless if I've challenged them to do that. Because what ends up happening is people get really attached to whether it's MyFitnessPal or other tracking apps, and they associate, understandably through conditioning, of, well, when I track, I lose weight. When I don't track, I gain weight. But it's because they're not looking at the framework we mentioned before, but it's not the app itself that's making you lose weight. It's the knowledge you're gaining. You're now getting a little bit more insight into what you're putting into your body. So with that knowledge, I have 100% faith in my clients that if we're just not going to track for a weekend, whether it's not tracking the numbers or not tracking altogether, you can still do well based on that knowledge that you've accumulated while you were actually tracking. And this brings up another good point, which is that, you'll see those streaks. If I've tracked my food every day for 90 days straight, and I'm not trying to take away from somebody's win there if they're proud of that, but every day that you don't take these proactive breaks, these breathers where you're not looking at other things besides numerical feedback, you're putting yourself in a position where the idea of not tracking gets scarier and scarier. Because I know a lot of people who do well when they're tracking, but if I said, hey, delete MyFitnessPal for the next week, they'd have a conniption. What if I that tells us that we need to take more breaks. So again, I'm a fan of the numbers. I'm a fan of data, but we also want to make sure we're not in a position where we are relying on it or getting a false sense of confidence from that, because it's not the app itself. It's not the numbers. It's not what you're tracking. It is the knowledge that you're then gaining from that stuff.
Yeah, I see. This is where I kind of go different in the fact that this is why I don't like tracking scale weight. Like, I want people to be able to use an app regardless, like to be able to track their food, because I feel like people actually going by the scale, especially women, they forget how to tune into their bodies. But for tracking food, it's almost just like always tracking your finances. Like, it's something that you want to keep tabs on for your life, but you can get more flexible with it as you get, like, as you live in this new body, as you live in this new identity, you can be a little bit more flexible with it. You can be a little bit more, I guess, lenient with yourself, because I know I make this much. I know how much I spend here. Like, I don't really check my statements anymore, because it's like, I know how much I spend every month. So I know how much I make sometimes I don't know how much I make every month, but I know that I spend within my means. And that can be the same with when you guys are eating your different foods. It's like, I know that I eat within my means. It doesn't really matter. Hey, this is actually good that I don't really track how much I make. I don't track how much I make, because to me, when someone asks me that question, I'm like, I don't really care. I care about how many lives I impact. That's what I'm doing. I want to impact more lives. I want to have more lives with me to impact. That's what I look at. But it's almost the same like when you're doing activity. Oh, I missed an exercise session. It's like, you don't track the output that you do, because you make more difference with your spendings, because you can make like a massive, you can do like a massive hard out session, but then eat freaking 2 pizzas and completely obliterate that session plus another 5. So if you get really comfortable within your means with the spending, and you have a rough idea of your incomings, it kind of works that way. Like, you know the spending, you know that kind of stuff. Whereas like with the scales, it's almost like you need to tune into your body more. You need to know how certain foods make you feel. Because if you know how eating, like, I had a girl who finally, she left me and then she came back to me, and then she's just like, what the hell, Ruby? I never thought that I'd actually feel this shit after eating Chinese takeaway, something like that. And I'm just like, wasn't that your favorite? She's like, yeah, but now it just tastes stupid and gross. Like, it feels so bad having bad food in my body. Like, you just become so used to feeling good. But before, like, she didn't know this before. She left because she didn't want to make it her lifestyle. And then she came back because she didn't like the alternative, cost of inaction. And now it's almost like she knows how good she can feel. So she doesn't want to go back to the way that she was feeling before. So she's making better choices.
Yeah, as an expression I think of often, that most people have no idea how good their bodies could feel on a daily basis. And the second you get a taste of that, that becomes an alternative metric that's not a numerical of, forget the calories, forget the protein. I just know this makes me feel this way. This makes me feel that way. That's enough of a driver. There's actually an article that I'm working on right now, and what I feel is a very, I want to say under discussed. I've never seen it discussed topic, or at least kind of broken down this way of, I find that most people, when they are dieting and they are tracking their calories and they're trying to lose weight, their only metric, the thing that drives all of their food making decisions, is how many calories does this have? Is it lower calorie? If so, that's inherently the best choice for me. And then whether it's a diet break, a maintenance phase, or not dieting, if the only metric while they were dieting was numbers, the only alternative metric becomes flavor alone. So it is, and I'm not saying you should eat meals that you hate, of course, but it's purely what is the best tasting thing for me right now when I'm not dieting, which obviously that's pizza, that's candy, that's cake, that's all these other things. And then they end up having to start their diet again. So one thing that I'll do with my clients, I keep saying proactively here, but it's so important, is independent of how many calories this meal has, independent of the flavor of this meal, what are some other reasons for you to make a good food choice? And the list goes on depending on the person's goals of, say they want to get stronger. say it's a woman I'm working with who wants to get, squat her body weight, or, do a push up on the floor for the first time, wants to recover well from that, wants to have better digestive health, wants to sleep better, all these other things that are really important for you to look for. That way you're not in a position where your diet is miserable when you're tracking your calories, because you're thinking low calorie is always better. And that's not remotely close to true. And then when you're not dieting, because you weren't ever looking for other reasons besides calories to make decisions, your only fallback is going to be flavor. And if you're only choosing foods based on how tasty they are, you're probably going to feel pretty shitty. So this is where we have to define what those alternative metrics are. Like you mentioned, it's not necessarily the income, it's how many people you're impacting. You've defined an alternative metric that moves the needle for you, that consciously on a daily basis pushes you to make good decisions. And it's the same thing here. We don't want to fall into it's calories when I'm dieting, it's flavor when I'm not dieting. There's so much other stuff, or so many other things I should say, that we're looking at in between those.
That reminds me of something else I was saying to someone before, where it's just like you see these stupid, I don't know whether you get them on Facebook, but I get like 10 ads a week from fit pros wanting to make you 6-figure, 7-figure incomes. And it's just like that sell of money doesn't attract me. But then if someone comes to me saying, do you want to impact more lives? Do you want to have better like coaching conversations? Do you want to have better this, better that? That's the shit that gets me, because that's what impacts lives. And it's like a fat loss journey. Are you going to just chase this outcome, or are you going to be driven by, I want to feel confident? One of the girls made a post the other day, and then the only thing I said to her was, and what did I tell you your first piece of homework was? And she's like, you made me buy some sexy lingerie, so I got myself some sexy pajamas. Like, that is what it's all about, because when she came to me, she wanted to feel sexy having sex. So that was my first thing for her to buy. Like, there are so many things that you can add to your journey that make it so much more fulfilling, where you can actually fall in love with the process and it becomes something that you do. Because like I always, for example, needed to have my photos in black and white because I didn't like seeing my body in color. Like that was me once upon a time. And I had girls who would in summer wear tracksuit pants and a big tracksuit jacket and go to the gym training in that. And now in winter, when it's freezing cold, booty shorts, crop top. Like, think of these things. Maybe you can think of some examples of that as well, because these are actually powerful things that I want people to visualize.
I think it reinforces what we'd mentioned earlier. Say this client you had buy the lingerie, of a lot of the things that you're after are almost certainly available to you prior to you reaching this end goal. So looking at what am I hoping to get out of this pursuit, and what are some alternative ways, or what are some ways that I can get there a little bit sooner, whether it is a self-esteem thing, whether it is you want to feel a little bit sexier, whether it is you want to be higher energy. And then you look for those things in advance, because there's a good chance that you can act, not a good chance, there's a surefire thing that you can actually experience those. Now, may they, potentially be amplified in some cases when you lose a little bit more body fat or get a little bit healthier, sure. But you don't have to wait for this black and white of, I want to lose 40 pounds. And when I'm up until 39 pounds, I'm completely miserable, and it's impossible for me to feel sexier, and it's impossible for me to be more confident and have higher energy. But when the scale moves 1 pound tomorrow, that's when the magic happens, because it doesn't actually work like that. So reinforcing yet again the importance of looking for those things that are likely available to you in some capacity, even if it's not in their final form, but in some capacity prior to reaching that benchmark.
There was an illusion. Oh, we keep going on. We'll have to figure out a way to sum it all up soon. But there was another illusion that I heard where they were using a heroin addict as an example. It's like all that heroin addict wants is that shot of heroin. And as soon as they get that, they just want the next one and the next one and the next one. And you're going to keep chasing those dopamine hits until you find real purpose in life. But something to relate it to the whole body thing, which is a lot of people don't realize this. It's almost like when people think, okay, but if I'm not focusing on my weight, I'm just going to be fat. Or if I'm focusing on all this fluffy stuff, I'm just going to be fat. You don't realize that you actually get better results when you fall in love with the process, because you actually stay on track. because the track doesn't exist. The track is your life, and you're learning how to live it.
Yeah, I think actually a guest that I don't know if you've had her on yet, that I had on Dr. Karin Nordine. She's coming on your show, right? Yeah. So one of the things she talked about when she came on my show was the idea of having approach-based goals versus avoidance-based goals. And so many people have these very reductionist, I'm going to do starting tomorrow, no more this, no more this. I want to be less. I want to be smaller. But if you do the approach-based goals, or what can I have more of? What can I pursue? What can I add? That's where you get a lot more enjoyment. You hear people like us saying, oh, you got to fall in love with the process. And a lot of people might feel like, well, that's ridiculous. Why would I like a transformation process when it's all about weighing less and being physically smaller and trying to burn more calories? It's just less, when you can look at what you're adding. Maybe it's more time outside, more time with friends and family. As you just mentioned, Ruby, when you shift your focus away from this weight, in some cases a bit of a weight obsession, you fear that, well, aren't I just going to gain a bunch of weight if I'm focusing on this less? Well, not if you're focusing on meaningful things that you can then add. Everything from the tactical X's and O's of more fruits, more vegetables, more strength training, but also the life outside of this stuff of more, high quality friendships, deeper relationships, high quality sleep hours, better stress management, more personal development, all these other areas that you may feel like distract you or get you away from your eventual weight loss goals, but indirectly support it in a much more effective way.
I love that so much, because you haven't watched my stories yet, have you?
Today, no.
Watch my stories, because I did something amazing yesterday that, well, I didn't know that it was going to be amazing until I sent it to 3 people and I got them to tell me what their opinions were of it, because I thought it would relate. And I got like these massive paragraphs from them saying how much it relates to them, because everybody does this. We focus on what we want to come away from. And back in 2017, I made 2 files on this exact topic, which is quite funny, which is why I laughed when you mentioned the chase and the avoidance, because it's seriously so big. This is why I've always spoken about it. If we visualize, we spoke about this at the start as well, but if we visualize everything that we can be, what we want to become, instead of the things that we don't want anymore. Like, I asked one of my girls a question, because I have a sheet that they fill in if they want to, but what is it that what is it that could happen this week, or where could you go down, and what is it that you want to feel? And every single time that they say what they want to feel, it's all, I don't want to feel this, I don't want to feel this, I am sick of feeling like this. I'm like, that wasn't the question. The question was, how do you want to feel, not how do you want to not feel? And I never get a response back. And then I like ask again, and then I still never get a response back. No one knows how they actually want to feel, because they're so busy harping on about everything that they're not, and all the failures that they do. So maybe this could be the best way to sum it up, because this is so freaking important. Like, guys, seriously, if all you want to do is avoid feeling like shit, avoid feeling like a disappointment, avoid failure, avoid sleeping in, avoid feeling like everything you do fails, why not flick the switch and think about all the other sides of it? Like, why don't you just write everything that you just wrote, but the opposite?
Flip it.
Yeah, just flip it. But then I had one of my psychologist friends, just going to quickly insert this here before you talk. One of my psychologist friends said to me, always write the opposite of what you're feeling if it's bad, and then meet yourself halfway, and then take it from there. Because it's so much easier to meet yourself halfway and then drag it towards where you want to be, instead of trying to flip the switch altogether.
I love that. That's so powerful. And yeah, when you're shifting things, if you think about most people's hurdle, if you ask them why they're not sticking to a plan, it's, well, I don't have enough motivation, and I burn out, and this happens, X, Y, and Z. Well, obviously, if your goal when you're waking up is, I want to eat fewer calories, I want to be physically smaller, I want to weigh less, I don't want to feel like this, I don't want to feel like that, I want this to stop happening. How sustainable is that for you to wake up every single morning and go, yeah, today's going to freaking rock, man. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait to not do, X, Y, and Z and be less of X, Y, and Z. Whereas if you do flip it, as you just mentioned, and look at what is the opposite of, okay, I don't want to feel so shitty. Okay, that's fine. The opposite of, I want to feel better. Better how? I want to have more energy at work. When? Why does that matter? Well, sometimes I feel lethargic when I'm presenting to my team on a work meeting. Okay, how might having more energy there make a difference for you? And then not only do you get a more meaningful why, that can add a little fuel to the fire when your motivation is coming in ebbs and flows, but you get much more tangible what you actually do want to feel. And then we can focus on what can we add to help you feel that way. Maybe it's a quick walk before work starts. Maybe it's ideally getting natural sunlight in the morning. Maybe it's hydrating before your morning coffee. And if you go this route instead, and you're waking up in the morning, and instead of focusing on, I want to feel this, I can't do that, I shouldn't do this, it's, I'm going to drink a little more water. So, I have more energy entering the workday and I present a little bit better. So my confidence is a little bit higher. That's actually appealing. That's something that, again, motivation comes and goes. We all know that, but that's something that is going to give you a lot more of a runway to be consistent, because that is so much more enjoyable to pursue than waking up and thinking of your do not do and do not feel, do not be type lists.
I'm going to tie this up together with two other things that we spoke about. That's the cost of inaction. The cost of inaction is everything that you're trying to avoid. But the thing is, instead of staying there, you need to know that shit, but don't stay there. You need to now move into who you can become. But I think it only just clicked now, which is why my eyes blew up before, is it doesn't really matter the cost of inaction. And it doesn't really matter who you want to become if you don't even believe it's possible for you. Because too many people do not believe they're worthy, and they do not believe they're capable. Because I didn't. And whenever I don't, what do? I get someone to help me along the way. Because if I don't believe I'm capable, at least I know that I can get some help to show me the way. And then I can become more capable. And then I don't even want to leave it, because that help makes me feel empowered. And then it takes away a lot of the decision making and actually allows me to make so much more out of my life, because all of that energy goes into other things in life. And I just opened up this really amazing quote that says, when you feel overwhelmed, it's a sign of abundance, because it means you have more than enough to do. You just need to learn how to prioritize so that the rabbits don't run away, as you said. Like, prioritize. And to sum that up as well, don't attach yourself to an identity either, because no one wants to wake up to this person they think they should be, or these things they feel like they need to do. Because I was there, and it worked until it didn't. And I still showed up, but I was miserable as hell doing it. And it wasn't until 2 years later that I realized, what did I do the last few years of my life? It was when I flipped that switch that my business boomed. It was when I flipped that switch that my life quality improved. It was when I flipped that switch that I actually also got my dogs. Like, my whole life just transcended when I wasn't living to this identity of, oh, I just need to hold this image up of the lean person. I have to hold this image up of the strong person, the whatever person. Like, the only expectations that exist are the ones you put on yourself.
A seemingly unrelated kind of analogy or recommendation that I think really does apply here is, you'll often hear people talk about, read as many books as you possibly can, but do not shy away from ditching the book 10 pages in if you don't feel like it'll serve you. So pick up books, just absolutely, abundantly. Like, I'm going to try this. Somebody recommended that. I'm just going to pull the trigger. I'm going to order this, order that. But then you're not married to it. If you get enough of the taste of it and feel like, you know what, this is probably not going to be a good use of my time, you need to be vicious with shutting that book and trying something else. And I don't feel like people do that with identities, and people don't really feel that about their goals. So to use a very specific example, for the time being, I have shelved my goal of becoming bilingual, of learning a second language. I just don't feel this is a separate conversation, but I don't really feel like I'm in the season of life where that is something that is necessarily, I don't want to say where it's a good use of my time, but it's clear based on my actions that I have been unwilling to prioritize that enough to see a return. So for the longest time, say longest time, maybe a couple of months, I wrestled with, do I put this on pause for now? Do I, do I jump ship on it? What do I actually do? And every day I wasn't willing to part ways with this goal. And one little tip here, and I actually got this from Karin when she came on the show, is when you give up on a goal or when you quit on something, you can just reframe it as, I'm pausing it, I'm shelving it. I can always revisit it later. It doesn't mean you're writing it off into the abyss and you can never touch it again. And for a lot of people, that's all they need to go, oh, okay, that's fine. So for me, when I made the decision recently to pause, actively trying to become bilingual, that was a big weight off my shoulders because of that reframe. But then more importantly, on a daily basis, my head was no longer hitting the pillow feeling like I failed because I didn't learn 20 new words today. So think of that book analogy of, yes, pick up books, pursue new goals, like try all these new things, but then be very vicious and very particular about when you're actually going to axe them. And axing them doesn't necessarily mean axing them forever. It's just perhaps pausing for now, redirecting, and then again, you have your head hits the pillow, you feel a lot better about how the day went because you're not looking around at your life, whether it's physically, logistically, your calendar, and feeling like I could have, I should have, crap, I didn't do this.
Some cost effect again, because by focusing so much on things that aren't actually really serving you right now, you're taking away from other areas that you could be giving all of that energy to. And kind of on the flip side of the books, there's also knowing your direction, because you might close some books that you actually needed to keep pushing through. And it's only because I remember reading a Netflix analogy where it's just like, it's almost like when you start a series, everyone says it's really freaking good, but the first 1 or 2 episodes is shit, but you still watch it all the way through because you know it's going to be good on the other side. Same with the books. You need to know which ones you do need to push through, which ones you need to close, and which ones are just you clinging on to stupid fluffy shit because it looks pretty.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I wrote an article, surprise, surprise, on this as well, on the idea of giving up on your goals and how that can actually be a really good thing. But I added a little caveat at the bottom of, hey, don't get this twisted. I'm not saying give up the second something gets hard or it's not completely seamless, because most really enjoyable, fulfilling outcomes are on the other side of really difficult work. So I'm not saying jump ship if like something is getting difficult. As you just mentioned, you got to know when to push through the first few shitty episodes of a Netflix series. You got to know when to push through this slow start to a book, but at least pay attention and be willing to part ways with maybe the Netflix series that's now 8 episodes in, it still isn't picked up for you, pivot, redirect that bandwidth to something else. And, as we kind of wrap things up here, tying it back to my way original thing, I'd said I had this list of like 35 goals and I wasn't moving the needle. The second I visually saw myself crossing these things out on the list, I woke up the next day with such like high powered tunnel vision of, here are the 3 to 4 things that I'm absolutely going to crush today. It's not like I had more time in the day. I just had more bandwidth to devote to a much narrower, much shorter list of things that deserved more of my attention for this season of life.
Yeah, I always say pick 6 things, put 3 on your later list and 3 on your yes now list. So right. With that, we've been talking for freaking forever, but we just bounce off each other like bloody yo-yos. Yo-yos. What's the? You bounce off each other at that. So with that, I will leave Sam's Instagram link in the bio, but I will also tell you that it's Coach Sam Forget. It's spelt, but it's pronounced Forget. But honestly, it's hard to accept the truth sometimes, but letting go of that ego that we feel like serves us but isn't really serving us is the first step to moving forward in the right direction. And with that, do you have any closing statements?
Again, I have like 9 thoughts in the tip of my tongue here. I'll reinforce what you mentioned, where it can be incredibly scary and daunting to part ways with whether it's a goal that you've always had, like losing the last 5 to 10 pounds that, month after month you've had that, or, adjusting your process. But keep in mind, you really have nothing to lose, especially if things aren't going well. And a lot of times nothing tangible or specific or huge needs to happen. Just that mental switch of, when I wake up tomorrow, I'm no longer going to beat myself up for not being bilingual. It is shocking what a difference it can make. So again, I recognize it can be challenging to part ways with this stuff at times, but again, it's almost always upside, and it's a night and day difference. And you'd be shocked if you just give yourself the opportunity to experience that. So I'll leave things there.
Just want to emphasize one word: experience. Experience. That's actually a really powerful word. We don't experience. Sit still and experience. I'll leave you at that. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to check the show notes.